Blizzard is making a new RPG FPS game in the Starcraft universe. Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm going to break all of this down and tell you everything that we know so far about this game. So, let's get stuck into this. So I think the first place we need to begin is with Starcraft Ghost. This was the first crack Blizzard had at the, I guess, the Starcraft universe into turning it into an FPS game. This was more of a third-person shooter, although, you know, obviously we can just use the term FPS. It was a shooter game. It wasn't a real-time strategy game, which is obviously what Starcraft is known for. However, this game was set to launch on the Xbox, the original Xbox that was, the PS2, and I believe the GameCube. So we're going back to like 2002 here. But however, this was cancelled in 2006 after 4 years. So we think the game was actually in development from before 2002, but that's when they first decided to show the game off. But however, they cancelled it in 2006. Now, why did they cancel it? Well, the reason they gave is World of Warcraft was kicking off. It was doing quite well. Well, they were getting ready to launch WoW, I think. No, WoW was 2004, didn't it? Yeah, it did. I'm just showing my age here. It's terrible. But basically, they put all the resources into World of Warcraft and decided to scale back, or at least that was the official explanation as to why it got cancelled. We will never really know, I don't think, why that game got cancelled. But I think it's a shame. It would have been nice to have seen that as a game, because it's not even just the fact that it would have been an FPS game in the StarCraft universe. It may have actually convinced Blizzard to start looking at their IPs and actually pushing them into genres they're not known for. So yeah, you've got your Warcraft, which was your RTS game, which they then converted into an MMO, but that's kind of the only time they've ever really done that. You look at your Overwatch, it's just an FPS game. It's not really anything else. There isn't any additional, I guess, experiences. I suppose with Warcraft, you can say, yeah, there's a mobile game, isn't there? Some sort of Warcraft Rumble thing. You know, whatever. But maybe Ghost could have convinced them to actually do more spin-offs, but hey, it was cancelled, so that was the end of that. So that was their first crack, was Starcraft Ghost, which obviously was cancelled. So the next crack, oh dearie, dearie me, this gets cancelled in 2019. And the reason why this one was cancelled is because they wanted to pour all of the developers into Overwatch 2, trying to salvage the launch of that game when it eventually would launch a few years later, and into Diablo 4, which hadn't obviously launched at that point. Now, this one was Project Ares. Now, this was a... I have not seen gameplay of this, but I've been told by people who I will not mention their names in this video. This was... Again, this is corroborated by, I believe it was Jason Schreier at the time, when he was writing for Kotaku, that it was a Battlefield game. This was essentially a StarCraft Battlefield game. Now, we don't really know if this was ever designed to launch, because it was essentially a test to see if Blizzard could make other games with their engines fast. And they actually put Dustin Browder was in charge of this project, and he now works at Moonshot Games, so maybe he's working on something similar. Who knows over there? But when he was at Blizzard, he was working on this project, and it was essentially a Battlefield game, right? So it was a big, large-scale combat game. Obviously, you've got your, you know, Terran Marines against the Zerg and the Protoss. Although I believe, from what I heard, it was mainly just Zerg against the Terran to begin with. But again, this could have just been, you know, you hear lots of rumors around all over the place with this, but I'm actually super gutted we never actually got to see this, because I think at that time, a large-scale, you know, proper Battlefield experience, a sci-fi experience, could have been really well. I mean, a game I always jump back to when I think about Project Ares, sorry, I should say, is PlanetSide. Now, I played a ton of PlanetSide, but I played more PlanetSide 2 when that launched, and then kind of fell away from that. And I think it's still playable now, but I don't know about the state of the game. But that was years and years ago. So the idea of like combined arms in a sci-fi universe with 3 factions fighting over territory trying to take land, it was really cool. And I think Blizzard probably could have done something with that. But as we know, that obviously didn't work. It got cancelled, and as we believe, all of the staff got pushed over to work on other projects to try and salvage them, or at least accelerate their development. So again, that was the second time they attempted to make a StarCraft FPS, and it all failed. But it looks like Blizzard are back again for a third try. So this story is kind of really interesting. It starts to develop a few months ago. So we got this. It's always a LinkedIn update. These executives, they can't help themselves. They're like, yeah, I have to update my LinkedIn and tell people I'm working on something, which I know I shouldn't really do it, but I'm just going to do it anyway. But this got picked up on Twitter over by Timur222. And yeah, look at this screenshot. It says, unannounced AAA RPG FPS title from Blizzard. And you can see this person here, which I will show you their LinkedIn profile in a second. They actually were working as Director of Product Management from August 2020 till August 2024. Now, they are the Senior Director of Product Management on Overwatch 2 and unannounced AAA RPG FPS title on PC and console. So confirms it's not a mobile game, it's a PC and a console game, and it's an RPG FPS. But wait, this is what happened next. This is Chris McCarb's LinkedIn page. If we take a look at what he says, now he's just working on an unannounced AAA title. Somebody's told you off, haven't they, Chris? You naughty boy. So take a look at this LinkedIn profile. This is Dan Hay. Now, you might not know who Dan Hay is, but Dan Hay was essentially in charge of the Far Cry franchise. Guess what Far Cry is? It's an RPG FPS. That's AAA. And I remember playing the first Far Cry, and that was sick because it had the pixel shaded water, and it was like, oh my god! At that time, they were insane graphics. But anyway, Dan Hay, look, he was at Blizzard, and it was at Ubisoft, obviously, for 10 years. He was the franchise executive director for Far Cry, but now he is the vice president and GM on an unannounced project. What is that, and what does it mean? Well, GM means general manager, so that's the person that is essentially in charge of it. If my camera would like to focus, there we go. He's essentially in charge of an entire franchise, right? They're like a unit head at Blizzard. So you would have like the GM for, Overwatch or whatever, Warcraft. They're in charge of that like department. They are the general manager, but also he's a vice president as well, which probably is to do with compensation packages and seniority and all of that crap within these corporations. But he confirms that he's working on an unannounced game. So you put two and two together, and you're like, okay, we've got the head of Far Cry who works at Blizzard, who is working on an unannounced project. We've got one of the product managers from Overwatch saying they're now working on a new RPG FPS game. That's AAA, that's for PC and console, that's unannounced. Then altering their LinkedIn to then say, anyway, whatever. But yeah. So this brings us up to today. Why even talk about this? This stuff has been out there on LinkedIn for a while. We're piecing things together. Well, it's because, as we know, Jason Schreier is on a blast to try and advertise his downfall of Blizzard and the future of Blizzard is play Blizzard, play nice, play fair, whatever it's called, book. And, play nice, the rise and fall of Blizzard. I should give it its proper title. I'm not a complete idiot. But anyway, he's been on a podcast. So he was over on IGN's podcast Unlocked. Now, I'm going to put a link to all this in the video description below. And he basically says that Hay is in charge of the Starcraft shooter, and this is mentioned extensively in his book. And this is what he said. I'll ad-lib and quote what he said. He said, if it's not cancelled, Schreier replied, this is Blizzard after all. Their history with Starcraft shooters is not good. Yes, that is a project that, as far as I know, is in development, or at least as of the time I wrote this book, was in development. They are working on a StarCraft shooter. StarCraft is not dead at Blizzard. He then goes on to say, the goal of the book isn't to get a bunch of scoops about upcoming things. That wasn't the purpose of this book at all. It was very much to tell a story and focus on stuff that had happened. But this felt like such an interesting and useful nugget to include because it really just shows you that Blizzard cannot quit StarCraft shooters. IGN also had a little bit more detail to Hay here. So Hay only came on board at Ubisoft in 2011, worked on Far Cry 3, which obviously was a major launch at the time. That was massive. And he then became the executive producer for the Far Cry brand, shipping Far Cry Blood Dragon, which is friggin' incredible. That is like amazing. It's like an 80s synthwave, like action movie version of Far Cry. It's so good. It's only a really small experience, but that was super cool. I think it's actually, I made a video on that. Again, this is dating me. I'm super old now. He then worked on Far Cry 4 and Far Cry Primal. And Hay was the creative director and executive producer on Far Cry 5 and executive director for Far Cry New Dawn and Far Cry 6 before he joined Blizzard in 2020 as a general manager and a vice president. So why an FPS game? This is the question. I think it's quite simple, to be honest. Blizzard are probably repurposing engines that they've built for cancelled projects. I mean, you think of something like Odyssey, right? We actually have screenshots of Odyssey. I'll throw them up on the screen that were leaked. And it's a third-person game. It's a survival game, this is. But there's potential that this AAA FPS RPG isn't an FPS in the sense of a first-person shooter. Maybe it could be a third-person shooter. And they're just sort of putting it under the FPS banner. That technically wouldn't be accurate because obviously third person is different to first person. You know, think of Helldivers 2, that's third person. Think of Valorant, that's first person, right? So there are major distinctions to be made between those two games in terms of the way they play. But like, I think it's just a case of they've probably got the expertise from running a game like Overwatch to think, actually, can we work with this engine and potentially stretch it and then work on a different type of PvE style experience in a different one of our universes? Or they could be developing a completely new engine. We know Blizzard do not use external engines. I think they were using Unreal, possibly. Actually, maybe they were using Unreal for Odyssey. I don't think they were, though. I think they had their own engine. I'll look into that, actually. Yeah, so my confusion with that was they were actually prototyping it on Unreal Engine 5, and then they moved it to an internal engine called Synapse that they were working on, but apparently had technical problems and issues with all of that. But I think the issue is they're looking for a bigger player base, right? This is Blizzard. I don't think they want to make games that are small, which I don't like. I honestly believe having games that have got smaller audiences that are worked on by smaller teams that are still profitable is still fine. But that's not fine in the big ultra corporate sense of the, you know, the massive publisher game, Microsoft of this world and whatnot. They want games with millions and millions of players. They want to take those gambles, make those gambles, and get players into those games. Now, it has to be said, though, having StarCraft not as an RTS game is going to be a bit of a shock. I still think it can work. I still think there's a lot going on. Maybe you look at games like Space Marine 2 that have done really well recently, and that's a really small contained experience. It's not a massive, you know, overarching experience. It's not a live service in the sense of a traditional one. Yeah, it does get updates, but it's not, you know, you're not like, you know, going to get tons of content plugged into that game simply because of the scope and the scale of the team. But what it delivered was enough. You can go in there and have an experience and play it and enjoy it. I think you look at Helldivers 2, they've got decent content coming to their game now. They've had a rough start with it, but they're seemingly starting to patch that up, and, you know, they've got good balance changes and stuff like that. But Blizzard, yeah, they run World of Warcraft. That is essentially, the MMOs were the original live service game. So there is hope maybe they could run a StarCraft FPS game in that sense. Again, in terms of whether it's free to play or whether it's a paid experience, again, who really knows? We can always talk about that massive elephant in the room, which is the state of Overwatch 2 at the moment and the way the monetization for that game went. There's probably odds on that Blizzard would do the same thing again with another FPS game. It would be refreshing if they didn't. We don't want to be nickel and dimed. We don't want battle passes. We don't want all of that stuff that's just in there for the sake of it. And in fact, I should just clarify that I'm not totally against battle passes. And Microsoft actually have Halo, where Halo Infinite lets you take your time completing battle passes, and you can complete any battle pass you want at any moment in time. They're not driven by FOMO, which is great. So maybe we'd see that in a StarCraft 2 game. But what I want you guys in the comments below to do is let me know whether you think this could work. Could a StarCraft FPS game actually work? It's the third time of trying. It is being headed up by the guy that literally ran Far Cry for 10 years. So could a Far Cry style StarCraft game work? It's interesting, isn't it? But it's definitely in development at Blizzard. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video. I've been Stylosa. If you enjoyed that, then let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. I'll catch you lovely lot on the next video. See you soon.